Welcome back to part 2 of our series on the post-hypergrowth hangover. If you haven't seen part 1, where we talk about the limitations of a getting shit done culture, you can find the link in the description below. In this video, we talk about the impact of hypergrowth on our ability to consistently make good decisions. We'll talk about what a decision-making engine is, the signals that show that it might be damaged, and why it's so hard for fast-growing companies to build and maintain a good one. My name is Antoine, and this is Business Landscapes. If you find this video interesting, please share it with your network and remember to hit that like button. It's not much, but it really helps. Do you know what separates great poker players from the rest of us? It's not luck. It's how good they are at making the play that has the highest probability of winning, or not losing, every single hand. And so, even if luck will always influence whether they win or lose any given hand, in the long run, their ability to consistently make good decisions leads to net positive financial success. But how do they do it? What's their secret? It's simply that they've built a finely tuned decision-making engine. What's a decision-making engine? It's the set of tools that we use to transform information into decisions. A reliable decision-making engine is a poker player's most important asset, and they are obsessed with constantly fine-tuning it. But to do that, they have to overcome a very powerful bias, the outcome bias, which is the tendency to judge the quality of a decision by its eventual outcome instead of how it was made. So why do I talk about poker here, and how does it relate to business, especially fast-growing businesses? Well, that's because a reliable decision-making engine is just as important to great businesses as it is to great poker players. But companies that successfully survive hypergrowth almost inevitably come out of it with a heavily damaged decision-making engine for two reasons. The first one is that they are prime candidates for the outcome bias. And the second one is that even if they manage to overcome that bias, it's extremely difficult to grow a good decision-making engine while navigating hypergrowth. When our business is booming and that all the indicators are in the green, it's really tempting to believe that it's because we are making all the right decisions. Hypergrowth, almost by definition, is a result of having successfully achieved exceptional product market fit. As a result, our company is propelled forward by rising customer demand and growing revenue. We are hot and other people notice it. We win awards, media talk about us, investors show up at our doors with buckets of cash, other companies try to copy us, and business scholars want to study us. All of that attention is not undeserved, because we did land onto something big, and maybe even successfully disrupted our industry. Being right against all odds and being hot and successful is awesome. But it's also when we run the risk of becoming overconfident and arrogant. It's very tempting to believe that our insights and wisdom extend way beyond our core, and that we can do everything better than anyone else. A symptom that our company might be getting a bit overconfident is when we overwhelmingly elect to build in-house instead of outsourcing or buying off-the-shelf solutions. Why use AWS? Let's build our own cloud computing solution. That's the kind of logic that almost ran Lego into the ground back in 2003. When there is evidence of success everywhere, and that there is no real pressure from the market, it's really easy to fall prey to the outcome bias and overlook the fact that good decisions, for example great product design choices or an insightful marketing tactic, can completely hide the negative impact of poor decisions, at least for some time. But what if we're self-aware enough to actually avoid the outcome bias? Well, even then, it's really hard to build a solid decision-making engine while navigating hypergrowth, for two main reasons. The first one is that we usually don't have an explicit decision-making process. And the second one is that analyzing past decisions is really hard during hypergrowth. As we talked about in part 1 of this series, during hypergrowth, we're deep in the getting shit done culture. Many decisions seem obvious, and what's important is to make quick decisions, to move and execute fast. In that context, it's quite easy to overlook the value of an explicit decision-making process and not invest in designing one. As a result, companies are likely to emerge out of hypergrowth with vague aspirational statements such as do the right thing, focus on customers first, use your best judgment, and never really spend the time to formalize their decision-making process. Number 2, analyzing past decisions is really hard during hypergrowth. One of the ways that poker players improve their decision-making capabilities is by regularly going over previous hands, or even entire tournaments, to reflect on the quality of their decisions.
One of the absolute best ways to learn is to go over a hand in depth in a hand breakdown. I bet 1150 and Alec makes it just 2500. I still think his range can be relatively wide.
Organizations that adopt the same discipline will find that they might need to revisit some assumptions, improve how they generate hypotheses, update their models, or spend more time gathering information up front. But again, during hypergrowth, there are two major issues that inevitably make this really difficult to do. The first one is just lack of time. When there are fires everywhere, or glaring opportunities to go after, it's hard to prioritize the time necessary to reflect on past decisions, even consequential ones. But an even bigger challenge is that we might struggle to connect the dots between decisions and impact within a reasonable time frame. Not only because we're making many decisions at the same time, but also because we operate in a highly uncertain environment and randomness is always part of the equation. On top of that, some decisions can actually be ticking time bombs, and we might not see their impact until much later. For example, after the organization reaches a certain size, or when we face more quote-unquote normal market conditions, like serious competition, for example. The point here is that no matter how diligent we may want to be, we're likely to exit that phase with a weak and biased decision-making engine. But again, that is not a problem at this point. The problem would be to miss the signals that show that we need to rebuild a solid decision-making engine and create the condition for continuously improving it over time. So what are those signals then? 3 symptomatic behaviors in teams and leaders when making decisions or talking about past decisions are particularly telling. They are called dogmatism, continuous betting, and flip-flopping. A dogma is a decision that has turned into a belief that can no longer be challenged or examined. When teams and leaders are no longer able to explain the logic behind a decision, or when they justify it by referring to circumstances that are no longer relevant, also known as the good old days, then a dogma is probably born. Continuous betting is more technically known as the escalation of commitment bias, which is a behavior pattern in which an individual or group maintains the same course of action despite facing increasingly negative outcomes. How do we know we're in this scenario? Well, when we keep on changing the story about why we made a decision or keep moving the goalposts, then we are likely to be more interested in defending our decision, to save face really, rather than honestly trying to evaluate the quality of our decision and finding if we should change our strategy. The opposite of continuous betting is called flip-flopping, which is when we keep on changing our short-term strategy because we don't like the immediate outcomes. Flip-flopping happens when we can't commit to mid to long-term bets because we have no confidence in our decision-making process. So whenever the early signs aren't encouraging, we back off and try something different. That means that we never make it past the lower part of the hockey stick that we see attached to pretty much every business pitch. And we never make it to the other side where we can reap the mid to long-term benefits of our decisions. When those 3 behaviors can be observed throughout the company, it's a pretty clear indicator that our company's decision-making engine needs some serious work. So, how can we build a solid decision-making engine and set it up to continuously improve over time? The first step, before anything else, is to root out any sort of culture of blame and punishment. If we have, even unintentionally, developed a culture where someone needs to be blamed and punished whenever a mistake is made, we are unlikely to have a learning organization. First of all, it ignores the basic reality that randomness is always part of the equation, and a good decision can result in a poor outcome. But more importantly, in this kind of culture, people will be much more interested in trying to avoid blame or shift blame, hide mistakes, make excuses, and generally not take unnecessary risks. There will be very little desire to analyze, discuss, and debate mistakes and failures to further improve our decision-making engines. So we need to shift back into a beginner's mindset, to remember how it felt when we started, when we were clueless about everything, and every time we fell on our face was an opportunity to learn something. We need to regain that very humble approach to testing and learning. The second step is to embed two key features in our decision-making process: deliberate experimentation and built-in retrospectives. An interesting example here is Spotify. They documented their decision-making process, beautifully named the Spotify Rhythm, and they explain how they identify bets through a series of deliberate experiments and feedback loops that allow them to constantly evaluate the quality of their decisions and pivot when needed. And over the years, they've been able to revisit some fundamental beliefs and significantly adjusted their strategy to remain relevant. For example, how they operated a major shift from desktop to mobile. And the third step is transparency. The practice of radical transparency offers a number of benefits to an organization. It spreads learnings far and wide because everyone can see not only the impact of a decision, but also the why and how it was made. Decision-making is a skill that is just best learned on the job. Second, it gives the opportunity for people to react and give feedback to those who made a decision. And also, you want people all around the organization to understand the intent behind a decision so that they can adjust accordingly and to be in a position to react quickly when time-sensitive opportunities arise. Finally, you want as much as possible to have everyone in your organization understand and see the full picture. When all that we can see is only a small fraction of the full picture, we are bound to make decisions that will optimize for that small part of the picture. And optimizing for a part often comes at the expense of optimizing for the whole. Another interesting example here is Bridgewater Associates, founded by Ray Dalio, who is a big fan of radical transparency. It's at the core of its decision-making process that allows the best ideas to rise to the top. Today, Bridgewater Associates is one of the largest and most successful hedge funds in the world. Thanks for tuning in to part 2 of our series on the post-hypergrowth hangover. I hope you found this video interesting, and if that's the case, please hit that like button. In part 3, we'll talk about the last problem, which is how fast-growing companies are likely to suffer from an increasing disconnect between who we say we are and how we actually work from a culture perspective. Thanks very much for watching, and until next time.